What's going on, guys? Kevin here from the sportsgeek.com, and in this video I'm going to do a couple of NBA lineup reviews of some big winnings from February 18th and 19th. You can see here on Thursday the 18th I placed second in the 3-ball contest, won $12,500, and then on Friday night went back to back with second place finishes, this time winning $15,000. So you can see I had 3 lineups in the Thursday contest. After I won that money, I bumped it up to 5 on Friday and placed second again. So I'm going to go over these 2 lineups and also one of my real good lineups from the $27 contest. All right, so I want to make this video as quick as possible, just kind of really quickly going over these lineups and kind of how I created them. And then if you guys have any questions, just leave them in the YouTube comments. I find that's easier than me talking for like 20 minutes about my lineups. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Starting off here, Thursday night, the 3-ball contest. So this was a $300 entry, 448 teams, and I got second place for $12,500. You can see here I had 3 lineups in this contest. Wasn't too far off first, 9 points off first, and I had a pretty solid lineup here. So you can see I've got FantasyLabs open to Thursday, February 18th, and we've got the highest rated plays here. What I will show you is I changed some of my projections on FantasyLabs based on gut feels, based on players I want to fade. So for 3-game slates, like Thursday night, it was the first night back from the All-Star break. It was a 3-game slate, and sometimes I will fade the top plays, even the top plays on FantasyLabs. If I think they're going to be highly owned, and if I think there's a chance that the player doesn't perform to the levels he's expected, I'll sometimes fade them. So I do change some of the projections. I love that about FantasyLabs. You can go ahead and you can just click on, let's say, Lebron James. Let's say I thought he was going to have a bad game and I wanted to fade him. I could put 30 there, and you can see his rating drops down to 36. So you can change player ratings based on gut feels and fades you want to do. And that really helped me out here on Thursday night, finishing second, and a couple of my gut feels worked out for me. The one that was the biggest was Lamarcus Aldridge. So everyone, he was 50% owned, so I heard a lot of people talking about him as a top play. And he was the highest rated on FantasyLabs, and I'll usually always play the highest rated players on FantasyLabs, especially the number 1 rated. But on a 3-game slate, there is good opportunity if you fade the top rated player and that player plays poorly, and that's what ended up happening with Aldridge. I changed his projection down to 29, and that dropped him down from the top rated player. So I did have him in one lineup. I wanted exposure to him, so I had him in one of 3 lineups, so 33%. He was about 50% owned, so I had him. I had less exposure than the field, basically, which is what I wanted. And then LeBron James was now the highest rated player here on FantasyLabs, so I locked him into my lineup. You can see he was only 26.8% owned, which was big. I thought he would be closer to 50, maybe 60, and he put up 50.75 points. And then another fade I wanted to do was at point guard. You can see I have Chris Paul in this lineup. I went with Chris Paul and John Wall in my lineups. Faded Irving completely. I knew a lot of people would be on him given his recent success. He had been averaging about 50 points per game over his last 3. So I wanted to fade him completely. Ended up working out with John Wall and Chris Paul both having big games. In this lineup that came second, you can see I had Chris Paul put up 58. And then Tristan Thompson, bit of a play just with the salary I had left. I couldn't really spend up at power forward given my roster construction, so I locked in these 3 guys first. And then just kind of with what I had left, Tristan Thompson became a play. He was a bit cheaper. He put up 40 points. Nene was a player I tweeted it out. I had exposure to him in all 3 lineups, actually. I really liked him. So you can see here, if we go to forward, with Nene, he was projected for about his average, which was around 20 points, and I bumped him up to 25 just based on a gut feel. That bumped him up in the FantasyLab player rankings, so I had him in my lineup. He was cheap, so it allowed me to spend up at these 3 positions here. And then you can see what I did at center. I went the double center with the utility spot with Tim Duncan. And I went with Gortat knowing that he would be low owned, so he's only 9.2% owned, so that was pretty awesome to get him at that ownership. I thought Pau Gasol would be really popular. I'm not sure his percentage, but I thought he would be up there, and then DeAndre Jordan I thought would be really popular. So I ended up bumping up Gortat's projection just based on a gut feel and based on fading these top centers here. So I locked him in, and then I think the last position here was utility. I had 5,100. So a lot of times when I'm building lineups, and if I get down to utility, I'll just sort by salary on FantasyLabs, and I'll see what's available at that price. If nothing is really close to that, then I'll reconstruct some other positions. But with this lineup, it came down to 5,100, and I had a couple plays to choose from. I could have taken any of these three guys. Looking at projections, I should have went with Crawford or Redick over Duncan, but it was kind of a gut feel that Duncan would have a big game. I thought he'd be lower owned than he was. I thought Jamal Crawford would be pretty highly owned given his recent performance. So it was a bit of a gut feel. I went with Duncan. He only put up 11.5 points. I was going to switch. This was a 10:30 game. I was going to switch before. Came back to FantasyLabs, checked it out, kind of did a little more research, and I just stuck with my gut feel. Unfortunately, this night, if I would have went with Crawford, I would have got first for 20,000. I didn't feel too bad about it because Duncan was my original play. Sometimes if you swap it out and it works out poorly for you, that's when it can really hurt. So I stuck with my original lineup and got second. So that was the first lineup. Next up, we got Friday the 19th. The first thing I did was I wanted Damian Lillard in a lot of my lineups. I thought because of the All-Star game snub and because he was going against Curry, he was going to have a big game. He did have a big game against Golden State his last time out, so I bumped up his projection to 50, and he actually put up 78 DraftKings points. So he had a monster game, 51 points. Didn't even go to overtime or anything. Just a crazy game, 9 3-pointers, 6 steals, which was pretty crazy too. So 78 points. So that was huge for this lineup. This is the $27 contest. So this was 26th place. So the first thing I did last night or yesterday was bump up Lillard, and I think I bumped up a couple other players. And for the $27 entries, what I did was I used the multiple lineup generator tool here at FantasyLabs. So you can click on lineups and go to generate multiple lineups. So I use this tool. I think I set this to 2 last night. I'm just messing around, testing 2 or 3 is usually what I recommend. Minimum rating, last night there was a lot of players in the slate, so I think I had it at 80, and I think I had minimum salary cap at 99.2. Then 20 lineup. I think I did 20 lineups here. Set that to 20, and I generated the lineups and just uploaded them right to DraftKings. So I did set some exposures, and I did change some projections based on gut feel. I think I had Lillard at about 60%, and it ended up working out pretty good for me. You can see I finished 26th, and this lineup actually had Tony Allen only put up 15.5 points because of an injury halfway through the game. So he was on pace to score 30, and if he did get to 30, I would have actually came first for 100,000. So pretty crazy to think about, but Tony Allen got injured, didn't get me there. But still pretty good finish, 26th out of 21,000. So that was that lineup. I had a bunch of different lineups in this contest, this $27 entry contest, just using the FantasyLabs lineup generator. I think I had $500 in entries and won over $1,000. So that was really good for me. The FantasyLabs projections and ratings were all pretty spot on last night. And you can see here, this is my $300 entry to the in the 3-ball contest. I had 5 entries, so after winning on Thursday night, or placing second, winning a bunch of money, I ended up bumping my entries up to 5 on Friday night, and it paid off for me with another second place finish. Again, I made a video with my top 3 plays of the night, and all 3 of them were actually in this lineup. We had Gary Harris, Damian Lillard, and Dwight Howard. So Dwight Howard was the only player that disappointed with just 27.5 points. I was expecting around 40 points, and that would have definitely put me over the top. But still a great lineup nonetheless. You can see here we had JaMychal Green, Paul George. Paul George was third rated player here on FantasyLabs. We had Pachulia. Let's see where he was. Yeah, 71, pretty highly rated. These are all built by hand. So for the $27 entry contest, I built them with a lineup generator. With these 5 entries, I built them all by hand. I think I only had Lillard in 3 of the entries. 2 or 3 I had him in my other lineup as well. I wish I had him in more. I should have had him in 4. It's easy to say now, but I should have had him in 4 lineups, given how much I liked him last night. But I guess that's easy to say now. Rondo, again, was a highly rated player. You can see him right here. So most of these players are just players that are rated high on FantasyLabs. I usually start with different positions or with the highest rated player. So for example, I might lock in Dwight Howard, just given that he's the highest rated player. Lock him in, then Lillard, then Paul George, then whatever I can fit in from there. So basically I'll just go through FantasyLabs and fill in the players I like. And then, for example, if I have 5 lineups, I'll make sure my exposure isn't too high on one player. So I really like Lillard. I would have him in maybe 3 or 4 lineups. Make sure that I don't have him in all 5 if I don't want the 100% exposure. Same thing goes with the next player. If I really like Gary Harris, but I'm a little worried, I might have him in 2 or 3 lineups. So I'll go through by hand and just pick players from FantasyLabs that have high ratings. And I always change any projections I want. So I'll usually use FantasyLabs projections for the most part. They have the best in the game, in the business. But if I have gut feels about players or I want to fade a certain player, I will change the projections. On a big night, I think there was like 14 games last night, I won't really fade players too much. You won't see me fading players unless I have a really strong feel about a certain player. I usually won't be fading players, but I will be changing projections upwards if I have a gut feel for them. So changing Lillard to 50 definitely helped me out. Bumped up his FantasyLab rating to 80.13, one of the highest on the night. So that's basically how I build my lineups. I've showed you guys videos before. It's pretty much the same process. I highly recommend going with gut feels. So if you have a good feeling about a player, like projections are usually more based on math and matchups and that kind of stuff. But if you have a gut feel, like Lillard was an all-star snub, I thought he was going to have a good game. He was going up against Curry. I thought he wanted to prove himself. He was playing at home, which helped a lot. So I bumped up his projection. So it's based on gut feels like that. That's where I've had the most success, is kind of finding a couple players that I like that a lot of other people aren't really talking about, and then bumping their projection up and see where they rate on FantasyLabs. And then from there, just using the top plays on FantasyLabs as well, the top rated plays in the player models. So you got to pay for the player models. I think you get the player ratings for free, but you definitely want the player models. If you don't have an account at FantasyLabs, I've got my link in the YouTube description below. It's just the sportsgeek.com/go/FantasyLabs. Highly recommend it. That's how I build all my lineups. That's how I've won a lot of money recently with NBA and NFL, and they're going to be launching at PGA soon, and they've got MLB starting up in like a month. So definitely recommend FantasyLabs. I basically go in there, if I'm playing like the $300 contest, I'll build them by hand, and I'll just go in and check out the highest rated players and kind of build from there. And then let's say I have one position left and there's maybe like $4,000 left to spend. You can do stuff like sort by salary and then kind of find the highest rated player in that range. So there's a lot of different stuff you can do with FantasyLabs, but you guys pretty much seen how I built my lineups. Basically just starting from the top and then seeing where I can fit in players given their salary and given the amount of money I have left to spend. And then also making sure that I change projections on players that I have a good gut feel about. And then on the smaller slates, fading certain players that a lot of people are talking about, that are highly rated, that a lot of people think are going to score a lot of points. Fading some of those players if I have a feel that they're not going to do as well. Or even if I don't have a feel that they're not going to do as well, I'll sometimes just fade a player, kind of hoping for some luck, hoping that they have a bad game. So that's basically it, guys. FantasyLabs and a little bit of my own gut feel, a little bit of my own research on just players in general, matchups, news, stuff like that. So not too much to it. I just highly recommend you guys sign up for FantasyLabs. They've got that new lineup generator tool that helps you build multiple lineups. So for the smaller contests, when I'm entering like 20, 30, 40 lineups sometimes, I'll definitely use the lineup generator. I do build my lineups by hand if I'm just entering maybe 3, 4, or 5 lineups. I'll build them by hand instead and just make sure I have my exposures right and that kind of stuff. So that's it, guys. Check out FantasyLabs in the link in the YouTube description, and that'll get you the best offer they're offering at the time. And good luck to you guys in future contests. I hope you guys win big soon. I hope I win big again so I can do one of these lineup reviews for you guys. And I hope my daily NBA picks continue to do well. Cheers, guys.